Member for Fowler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I also would like to thank the member for Kooyong for bringing this matter of public importance to the House. Having a roof over our heads is something that most of us take for granted. I say most because there are Australians who do know what it's like to be homeless. And having been homeless myself by the ravages of war, I spent many years as a refugee, never knowing any sense of a permanent or stable home environment. Like the Prime Minister, I also grew up in public housing after our resettlement here in Australia. We were incredibly lucky and privileged and grateful that Australia had the right economic circumstances for us to rebuild our lives and the opportunities to work for a stable and prosperous future. As we've been hearing today in the House, the economic conditions are becoming more challenging for many working Australians and making it harder also for our young people and those on low socioeconomic income to be able to save, to afford to buy a home or even to rent. It doesn't take a PhD in economics to understand the high prices that are driven by shortage in housing supply. Whilst population increase is measured across the whole of Australia, it is not evenly distributed. Australia has relied more and more on immigration to boost population growth as birth rates have decreased. And the major cities have inevitably seen populations boom because that's where the jobs and infrastructures are. My electorate of Fowler has particularly felt the increase sharply, especially in the past decade, where we have seen almost 20,000 refugees and asylum seekers resettled in my electorate. These new arrivals require a roof over their heads as well as demands for services. With over 50% of the population, Fowler's population born overseas compared to 30% of Australia's, many come here to make a new life, seeking opportunities. Home ownership is a pipe dream for anybody other than the super rich, as the incredible cost of building new homes means that it's becoming nearly impossible to even find a home to rent. In Fowler, almost 44% of the population rent, and with a high population on low incomes, how on earth can these individuals afford the increasing in rents as well? This is a terrible situation. Home ownership is about more than just financial security for those who live in them. Home ownership inculcates a commitment to a local community. It strengthens the ties that bind us to our neighbours and to our country. Many of the great buildings of Australia, such as the New South Wales Parliament and the Queen Victoria building, were built before government regulation had reached its tentacles into the finest details of the planning and building processes. Yes, we have seen a sea change in the safety and welfare provisions for workers in that span of time, and many of those regulations are good and in the best interest of us all. But the taxation and regulation of the building industry is another example of the ability to legislate going out of control. And I know that the Prime Minister had faced attack from his own New South Wales State Premier on the lack of housing. So in the spirit of the House of Reps' cooperation and solidarity, I want to help him. The fact is that New South Wales state taxation and planning restrictions play a significant role in the cost of building houses in our great state. The zoning tax, for example, is the price you pay for the legal right to put a dwelling on a piece of land. This right obviously increases the value. Well, in Sydney, zoning tax accounted for 42% of the cost of a house and 68% of the cost of an apartment in 2016. That's before we even begin talking about increasing costs of labour and building material. So the Prime Minister could do something at the federal level to pressure his state and territory colleagues to increase the housing supply. He could remind Premier Minns that he stood beside him at the announcement of the National Housing Accord. Instead of the Premier asking for more money from the federal government, he could be reminded that New South Wales has been given a lot of money for infrastructure already. So every opportunity should be taken when federal infrastructure fund goes out onto the state and territories to make it conditional on building a specific number of new homes. Writing cheques for Sydney's Metro, Sydney Beaches Link and the Aerotropolis should be accompanied by demand to build them. Deputy Speaker, unless the nettle is grasped on increasing housing supply, we are going to see profound change for the worse in our societal values and standard of living. We don't need to wait for things to get worse. I think we're already there. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.